1980 election campaign is a key turning point in the importance of religion in US elections. The mobilisation of the evangelical voters for the first time was really important, as it was the first time that they became part of the Republican support base, and they still are today. So that can be traced back to this election campaign. Also, the close relationship that we see today between religion and politics its roots can be seen in this election campaign in the way that Reagan brings the two together with his religious discourse. So just to quickly recap the background to the election from the previous capsule. So Carter had lost the trust of the evangelical voters due to a lack of action on important issues such as school prayer and abortion. And he also had a high level of support for the Equal Rights Amendment, which many evangelicals believed went against their conception of a traditional family unit. So at this time, there was a large movement of evangelical grassroots groups who were mobilising, getting much larger and gaining influence. They were calling for a spiritual revival, and this was all against the background of the liberal social reforms of the 60s and 70s, the economic climate, which had a high levels of inflation and unemployment, and they were really calling for a return to American values and a return to these religious values that they believed to be American. So here's Jerry Fulwell. He led the moral majority, and in the run-up to the 1980 election, Fulwell preached to get them saved, baptised, and registered. So you really can see the way that religious voters who had previously not been heavily involved in politics, weren't a reliable voting bloc, tended to vote quite equally Democrat and Republican, were sort of being united by this rhetoric. And in the run-up to the election, he managed to, the moral majority and other lobbying groups managed to mobilise 3 to 4 million voters to lean towards the Republican Party. So Reagan's acceptance speech, which we put on the Padlet to watch before this capsule, and he pauses and hesitates at the end of the speech and asks his audience to begin our crusade in a moment of prayer. And we think this is a really significant moment of bringing religion and politics together in quite an obvious way. This quote says, "It was grand political theatre. It was a moment when religion and partisan politics were brought together through mass media as never before." Simply put, a moment when a new religious politics was born. And what was quite clever about this speech was that it appealed to the evangelical vote, which it had to in order to get those 3 to 4 million votes that had been mobilised. But it also appealed to the broader American public, and it began a sort of, I suppose, something that is continued to be seen of presidents alluding to religion, and that being seen as an American rather than a religious thing. Yeah, and he ended that acceptance speech with the phrase, "God bless America." And that was actually the second time that phrase has ever been used. It had only been used by president once before Reagan, and nowadays it's seen as an American phrase rather than a religious or Republican phrase. It's very much used by all presidents, it says here it was almost entirely absent from the modern presidency until Reagan took office. Since then, they've become a political staple, and I think this graph kind of illustrates that as well. Not only the phrase "God bless America," but Reagan regularly invoked God and religion during his speeches, and as you can see, that continued through Bush's and Clinton, and definitely you can see that with Trump, the way he uses religion. So the way that Reagan shifted his positions on certain issues really demonstrates the way that, the increasing influence that the evangelicals had after they mobilized. So Reagan, actually, when he was a California senator, supported abortion, signed the 1967 Therapeutic Abortion Act. And then on the right, this picture, you can see he said this during a 1980 presidential debate. I've noticed that everyone who is for abortion has already been born. So really changing his stance and appealing to the religious voting base. There'd also been Republican neutrality on the Equal Rights Act. They had supported the Equal Rights Act, and then he was neutral on it, said he would support equal rights in other ways. You might have seen that on the video that we posted, another clip from the 1980 presidential debates where he said that the ERA could actually harm women by forcing them into combat. And that was very much the argument that many of the evangelicals had, and that some of these big preachers like Jerry Falwell, that's the argument that they would often say to large crowds. Reagan had to heed the demands of the evangelicals. So this really demonstrates the impact of religious mobilization on Republican positions on very key issues. So the lasting effects of Reagan's election, and I suppose presidency more generally, I would say was mixed, because although the Christian right enjoyed an increased public prominence, the effect on policy was limited. School prayer was still illegal, abortion still illegal, there was increasing gay rights. So all of these very key issues that they lobbied for didn't actually change that much during his presidency. He did appoint Sandra Day O'Connor as his Supreme Court judge. She was a swing judge. She still supported the Roe v. Wade ruling. So it was mixed in terms of policy. In terms of long-term impacts, I think that the most important thing was the party realignment from evangelicals being bipartisan to supporting Republicans. And you can see in this graph here that Reagan's presidency really kind of marked that shift to shift in the direction of the identification with the Republican Party.